Don't you just love a good story? Whether it's a myth, an old wives' tale, or even an urban legend, we love hearing these entertaining yarns. Welcome back to another episode of Remnant Stew. My name is Leah.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Steve. Join us today as we take a deep dive into some fascinating tales. This is Season 5, Episode 12, Legends and Lore, Part 1.
If you have an appetite for the strange and bizarre, then pull up a chair and grab a spoon for another intriguing serving of Remnant Stew. Remnant Stew is gluten-free, organic, made from all natural, free-range ingredients, and guaranteed to provide the recommended daily serving of curiosity.
Well, we've all heard them. Myths, lore, old wives' tales, legends, and even urban legends.
Love those too.
While the overwhelming majority of these tall tales have no real concrete factual basis, they're an important part of popular culture.
Yeah.
And often they contain what is perceived as important morals, warnings, or lessons. But beyond that, they're also good fun.
Yeah.
From a website called livescience.com, we find this quote by Michael J. Coven, a folklorist at the University of Wales. Quote, "Life is so much more interesting with monsters in it."
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
It's the same with these legends. They're just good stories.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
and I have to say that, like, if I had known that folklorist was something that I could go to college and do, I think I would have done that.
I wonder how that pays. I don't know.
Well, probably not a lot.
Probably not a whole lot, but for the ones who get the job, it's a good job.
It pays about as much as podcasting, I think.
But we have a lot of fun.
We do.
Well, while researching for this episode, we found so many intriguing legends and fascinating lore that we're stretching this topic into 2 episodes. Yay! Not just 1, but 2. We searched through several dozen sites and collected what we feel are the most interesting. And then we noticed something.
Right.
Fully half of the material that we accumulated was related to one area, and it's not the United States. Can you guess where? Well, none other than pip, pip, chitty-o, jolly old England.
Of course.
And Scotland, too. Okay, so we have divided this 2-parter into a non-British episode, which you will hear today. And then part 2 will be nothing but British legends and lore. So that'll be our next one coming up in a couple of weeks. So that'll give you some time to accumulate your scones and your crumpets and even maybe some haggis to help you enjoy that British episode.
Yeah, no, thank you on the haggis.
So part
haggis.
1 is everybody else.
Right, everybody else.
Everybody else. Yeah.
Is just about
just British,
Great Britain.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
Exactly.
All right.
Now we're going to start off with our first story, which is titled Van Hunks Smoking with the Devil. It doesn't have anything to do with well-built dudes that are hanging out in vans.
I was going to ask,
No.
are these bodybuilders?
From Travel in History, and that's spelled TravelNhistory.com. You see how clever they are. We find an interesting article titled Local Folk Tales and Legends from Around the World. Now, this particular travel website, TravelInHistory.com, they utilize bloggers from all over the world for their stories. Well, for this article, they asked their contributors to dish on local folk tales that are known in their own home area. And so we're going to share some of the most interesting ones here. And this first one comes from Cape Town, South Africa. It's a place I'd love to see. I've never been there yet. It's on my list to go. But a blogger named, I believe it's Katja, Katja, but I believe it's pronounced Katja Mamakos, shared the tale of Van Hunks smoking with the devil. Cape Town is a beautiful coastal city at the very southern tip of the African continent. It is backed by an enormous mountain with a flat top, and it's called Table Mountain. Well, the story goes that an old Dutch pirate named Van Hunks, that's where we get the Van Hunks name from, he used to trek up the mountain and smoke his pipe there under a tree. He did it so often, and he was so good at puffing away that eventually the devil grew curious. So one day, when Van Hunks reached his favorite smoking spot, he found a youth sitting there who asked him for a light. Van Hunks obliged and was soon challenged to a smoking competition. He was confident of his skill, and he had the time, so the old pirate said, "Sure, why not?" The pair sat puffing and puffing until the thick smoke shrouded the whole mountain. After several hours, the youth conceded that Van Hunks was the superior smoker. As he walked away, Van Hunks noted that the youth had a red barbed tail, and it was then that he realized that he had spent the whole afternoon smoking with the devil. And so now, whenever the clouds roll in and cover Table Mountain, the locals say...
Insert heavy metal song here.
that Van Hunks and the devil are at it again.
It sounds a whole lot like when the devil went down to Georgia.
Yeah,
Right?
Only he went down to South Africa this time, yeah.
Just to smoke a pipe. Okay.
One thing we forgot to do in this write-up is talk about some of the past legends and things that we talked about. So the
Right.
legend of the mermaid chair
Yeah.
in our mermaid episode, I think that was in season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And we covered a lot of urban legends.
Yep.
Right.
And I don't remember what episode that was, but we've covered a lot
It'll
of
come
legend
to us
and
as
lore
we go
before.
along.
Or maybe.
That's true.
We're-
Well, now this next one comes from a French blogger named Layla Alyanak.
Yeah.
Alyanak.
Yeah.
It's called The Legend of Lady Sermonde, and it comes from the rugged red-colored hills of Provence in southern France.
Beautiful
red-
place. I've been there, yeah.
Yeah, red-colored hills.
Yeah.
The chateau of Roussillon was once occupied by a certain Lady Sermonde and her husband, Lord Raymond, or probably Ramon,
Yeah.
who spent his days hunting rather than with his wife.
Uh-oh, I smell trouble.
Right?
It
She
never ends
twiddled her
well.
thumbs in boredom until one day a man named Guillaume was hired into the household, and, well, you can guess what happened.
Uh-huh.
It's hard to keep a secret like that for very long. As they say in France, the walls have ears.
That's true.
So does the staff.
Right, the
Everybody
staff and
else.
everybody.
Right.
That's right. So when whispers of the indiscretion reached Lord Raymond, he was, of course, furious. He invited Guillaume to go along with him on a hunt, and I think it's a good rule of thumb to never go on an expedition involving firearms with the husband of your lover.
Yeah, probably a good rule of thumb
So-
right there. I think.
But Guillaume agreed
Words
to
live
go.
by, yeah.
Well, he agreed to go, and while on the hunt, Lord Raymond asked pointedly if Guillaume was in love with Lady Sermonde.
Mm-hmm.
Telling an understandable white lie, Guillaume told Lord Raymond that yes, it was true he was in love, but with Lady Sermonde's sister Agnes.
Oh, the
Oh,
sister.
no.
Oh, yeah.
So
No,
Lord-
it's not her sister. Seriously.
So the Lord apologized for his false accusations, shook Guillaume's hand vigorously, and
Oh, so-
they went on. So, however, the following night, he witnessed Guillaume sneaking out of Lady Sermonde's bedchamber.
Uh-oh.
The next morning, he invited Guillaume to go hunting with him again, but this time he attacked Guillaume and cut out his heart. Then he returned to the chateau and told the cook to prepare the heart in a stew.
Oh.
Yeah.
The hearty stew
Oh, I see what you did there.
Well-
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
was then served to Lady Sermonde,
It was palpitating.
who
wasn't it?
licked her plate clean and pronounced it the most delicious stew she had ever tasted.
Oh.
Once she had wiped her face, Raymond revealed the awful truth, upon which she ran out of the castle and threw herself off the hills. Her blood ran through the earth, turning it a dark red color that it still has to this day.
Oh,
And that's
that's how-
why the earth is red at that.
Wow, the red
that area.
hills of around the castle of Roussillon, okay, in Provence. Wow, now let's go to the Philippines to hear about the Manamagal.
Oh no.
A blogger named Christine Rogador writes about a mythical creature in Filipino folklore called the Manamagal. That's Manamaggal. The Manamagal is described as a hideous woman with wild hair and big eyes.
Hey, that sounds like me.
Its
I think
teeth,
I've woken up a few times as a child and saw that come running out of a bedroom or two.
its teeth can grow fangs,
Yes, my
and its
sisters.
fingers can grow vicious claws. And here's a cool trick: it can detach its upper and lower torso, and the upper part can develop huge bat-like wings to hunt its next victim.
Oh, separation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, one of the Manamagal's key targets is grooms-to-be. Taking on the appearance of a beautiful woman, the Manamagal will lure the man to a secret spot where it devours his stomach, heart, and liver. Seems like an odd combination there, but okay. Another favorite prey of the Manamagal is newlyweds and also pregnant women.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Now, the Manamagal's severed lower body is thought to be the more fragile of the two pieces. If somebody comes across this severed lower portion, sprinkling salt or smearing crushed garlic on top of the standing torso will kill the creature, and after that, the upper torso will be unable to reunite and will perish at dawn.
Okay, that
Yeah, so if
I
you come
wonder where
across
this came from.
half
Like
of a
what?
body standing there, smear some garlic and salt on it.
Is it just tapping its foot?
Yeah, it's just in there waiting,
Just
biding its
dance
time for the
going
top
on?
part to come back. The
a different type
Manamago
of
avoids,
lure.
this is what it avoids: daggers, light, vinegar, and stingray tails, in addition to salt and vinegar. You could just feed it some
Stingray.
salt
vinegar.
and garlic. You could just feed it some salt and vinegar potato chips. That would probably do the trick.
Yeah, I got
Now-
some Lay's lying around.
It's unknown where the legend of the Manamago originated, but one prevailing theory is that the myth was perpetuated by the Spanish, who invaded and colonized the Philippines in 1565. At the time, there was a group of powerful women in the Philippines named the Babaylans, who were respected diviners and spiritualists. It's thought that the Spanish created the myth of the Manamago in an attempt to link the creature to the Babaylans and thus discredit them. So don't go be hanging around those Babaylans. They'll steer you wrong.
Well, the Philippines have got some very interesting urban legends and creatures.
Right.
And that reminds me of, we did cryptids from around the world and
Right.
everything. Well, from Ireland, and no, Ireland is not a part of Britain.
You thought you had us there, didn't you?
We hear from a travel blogger named Isabel Hoyne, who tells us about the fairies and the hawthorn tree. Now, you may think more about leprechauns when you think of Ireland, but the Emerald Isle is full of legends about all manner of creatures, and they take fairies very seriously.
Right.
Hoyne writes that in Ireland, it is a very common superstition that you should never cause harm to a hawthorn tree, particularly if it stands alone.
Okay.
The belief is that the hawthorn tree marks the location where fairies convene after sunset. These trees are also known as fairy trees, and it's believed that they contain the portal by which the fairies ascend and descend to and from the earth.
The hawthorn tree. Okay.
Quoting from Hoyne, if you drive through the Irish countryside, you'll often see a lone hawthorn tree on a hilltop in the middle of a field, sometimes fenced off,
Oh, they're protecting it. Okay.
or in an ancient ring fort, and there's a reason for that. They've been left that way on purpose, lest the little people, not leprechauns but fairies, are disturbed. The legend is taken quite seriously in Ireland, so much so that in 1990, a proposed bypass road was completely rerouted in order to not disturb a sacred hawthorn tree, where legend claims two warring groups of fairies meet for battle.
Well, wait. I'd like to see that. They should televise those
Yeah,
fairy
right?
battles. I think I'd tune in to watch that.
The Irish believe that meddling in the affairs of fairies is a surefire way to draw negative attention to yourself, thus the need for caution.
Yeah.
Throughout history, they've been blamed for crop failures, livestock deaths, ill fortunes, sickness, you name it. Some even blamed the fairies for the potato famine of 1845 through 52, which we covered in our terrific Season 5, Episode 7 about potatoes called This Spud's for You.
Oh, that was a great episode. I love that one.
So if you see that lone hawthorn tree when visiting Ireland, make sure to treat it with the respect it deserves and don't irk the fairies.
Don't irk the fairies.
That's a new slogan.
It's a good rule. Hey, you. Yes, you there listening to this podcast. Have we told you lately just how much we appreciate you? Well, we do. So much. And so can we ask for a favor?
It's an easy favor. If you would, please take just a couple of minutes to give us a review on whatever app you're listening on. It may not seem like a lot, but it really does make a difference.
Yeah, it's all about algorithms, altruisms, Pythagorean theorems, all that techie stuff, which boils down to the fact that it helps other listeners and sponsors find us. So if you enjoy Remnant Stew, it would mean a lot if you took the time to give us a review. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Right. Well, now we find some more unusual myths and legends from a travel website called dealchecker.co.uk. As most of you know, Sir Kraken, the octopus, is our globe-trotting mascot here at Remnant Stew.
That's right.
He has been spotted far and wide in recent years, and we are told that he'll be traveling again later this year, so keep watching our social media for updates on his new adventures. But perhaps you may not be familiar with the origins of his familial namesake, and that his heritage can be traced to Scandinavia. The Swedes and Norwegians have long been noted as great seafarers, as well as the Danes. We should include them too. Of course, the Vikings were famous, or perhaps we should say infamous, as they sailed and conquered much of Western Europe 1,000 years ago. In the years after the Vikings, Scandinavian fishermen became skilled at sailing many miles away from the land to harvest the bounty of the sea. Of course, with all that sea travel, you are bound to encounter some unexplainable sea creatures. Imagine being on a small fishing boat and catching a glimpse of a creature that's 30 feet in length, and that's just the part that you can see. Your imagination would run wild, conjuring visions of an unholy being sent to swallow you up. You'd certainly mention it when you got back to land, and this is what Scandinavian sailors and fishermen reported, and their collective terror became known as the legend of the Kraken.
The Kraken!
Originally, the word Kraken was a Swedish nickname for whales. You see, they were superstitious, and they wouldn't allow their superstition would not allow them to actually even say the word whale because of fear that saying the word would summon the mighty beast and they would swamp your boat and eat you. So they just said Kraken instead. Later, in Swedish and in Norwegian, the word Kraken came to mean a sea creature that was twisted and deformed, kind of like a delinquent sea monster who was looking for trouble. Most likely what these sailors were seeing was a giant squid,
Right.
which they can reach lengths of over 40 feet, and they can actually be aggressive. So the name Kraken came to represent a feared, legendary creature of the deep. So the next time you see a photo of Sir Kraken clinging to an airplane wing over Mount Rainier, that's been on our social media in the past, also posing next to a giant potato in Canada, or curled up inside a wooden shoe in Holland, or relaxing on a beach in Greece, well, pay the cephalopods the respect that he's due. Don't mess with the Kraken.
Is he kin to the fairies?
No.
Oh, okay.
Now, most people are familiar with the unique outline of the country of Italy.
Oh, yeah.
The country takes the shape of a high-heeled boot jetting southward from the mainland of Europe. Just off the toe of the boot is a somewhat triangular-shaped island of Sicily.
Mm-hmm.
Between the toe of Italy and Sicily is a long, narrow body of water known as the Strait of Messina.
Okay.
The Strait of Messina is only about 20 miles long. It's just 2 miles wide at its narrowest point. And it was greatly feared in antiquity by sailors because of its hidden rocks and whirlpools.
Oh, yeah. It's got a treacherous waterway.
So in his Odyssey, Homer personified these two dangers as female monsters named Scylla and Charybdis. These two terrors.
Good job on that pronunciation there, by the way.
Well, okay, so I used to be a fan of The Police. And there's a song. What is it? Wrapped Around Your Finger?
Right.
Yeah, I think that, and he sings
that's the
about that. Well, these two terrors occupied opposite sides of the strait. On one side, there's the Charybdis, a creature that dwells in the depths of the ocean and sucks ships into a swirling whirlpool to their peril. On the other side, there's Scylla, a six-headed monster that plucks men from ships to eat as they pass along.
Oh, dangerous waters, for sure.
Odysseus must take the difficult choice of which side of the strait to sail. He might possibly chance sneaking his ships past Charybdis, risking the long odds of not getting sucked into the whirlpool or the vortex, but all of his men will die if they don't make it. On the other side, Scylla will definitely eat 6 men from each of his ships, but the rest would be able to escape.
Only 6. It's like popcorn.
Yeah, so being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's a pretty tough choice to have
And
to
so
make,
what choice would you make?
Yeah.
Odysseus
I
decided...
need 6 volunteers.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he did. He decided
Pick
to
up 6
sail.
people you don't like and put them out there.
It's the short straw. And there's
Come to
6
the top
short
deck.
straws, right?
That's right. He decided to sail by Scylla and sacrifice 6 men from each ship in order for the rest of them to have safe passage.
Oh, thanks. Good story. I like that one. Now, you're probably aware that Japan is a nation found in the western Pacific Ocean on 4 main islands and thousands of smaller ones. The nation is located where 4 tectonic plates grind against one another, and it's also part of the Ring of Fire, and so as such, it is heavily prone to experiencing earthquakes.
Right.
A whole lot of shaking going on. You're
In
welcome.
fact, a website called worlddata.info states that a 4.0 or higher earthquake takes place somewhere in Japan almost every day. I saw the chart.
Oh, I didn't
Sometimes
know
it was
that.
twice a day, and then there might be 2 or 3 days go by, and then there'll be another 1 or 2 or 3. But I mean, just almost every day there is an earthquake somewhere in Japan that large. In fact, you probably recall about 13 years ago in 2011, the Tohoku quake, which measured 9.1 on the Richter scale, and it sparked a tsunami. More than 15,000 people died because of this quake alone, and the quake and the tsunami. The Japanese are very well aware of the dangers of earthquakes, and to help the public understand what to do and where to go, they have drawn upon some of their ancient folklore. Enter the Namazu. No, that's not a new car.
It will be next week.
You might recall that the ancient Japanese neighbors in China believed that the earth sat on the back of a giant turtle and that earthquakes were caused by his movements. Well, in Japan, they didn't figure a turtle into their beliefs. Instead, they had something else. Nowadays, we know that earthquakes are caused by plates shifting slightly, but in ancient times, people had to explain why the ground beneath them suddenly started shaking. They blamed it on Namazu, the earth-shaking catfish.
Catfish.
I had no idea.
Nice.
I didn't know that's where this was going.
It's a catfish.
According to the legend, Namazu lives under the island of Japan and occasionally thrashes his mighty tail, causing earthquakes. The only force who can stop him is a dim-witted and easily distracted deity named Kashima. I think Kashima was in ISS quite often when he was in school, in a deity school. When Kashima gets sidetracked, then Namazu begins thrashing about, and before you know it, the earth starts quaking. Even though the science of predicting earthquakes has advanced tremendously, the Japanese decided to utilize Namazu in their early warning system. Throughout Japan, you will see signs depicting the giant catfish along with instructions about where and how to get to safety. So if you're in Japan and the ground begins shaking, look for Namazu.
Nice.
Oh, that's interesting. That is very
Well, if you're going to
interesting.
bring it forward, make use of it.
Well, now a little bit more about the Tohoku quake of 2011. Tohoku earthquake, named for the region of the northwestern Japan from which it originated, was the most devastating in the nation's recorded history.
Right, really terrible.
On March 11th at 2:46 p.m. local time, the earthquake started. Centered 45 miles east of Tohoku at a depth of 15 miles below the surface of the ocean, it shook the earth for a full 6 minutes.
Wow,
man.
6 minutes. Have either of you ever been in an earthquake?
I never have, but that's
No, I have not.
a
I have
long
been
time.
when I lived in Seattle, and let me tell you, it gets your attention. I wasn't in one really bad. I think it was about a 6, but you're in your house. Okay, the best way I describe it, like if you ever been in a boat on a lake and
Yep.
like another boat comes by and the waves make your boat go up and down.
Right?
Okay, in this case, your house is going up and down, and you can't do anything to stop it. Now that one was only a few, maybe 10 seconds or so. I can't imagine it going 6 minutes.
6 minutes of
And
that.
I have no
Wow.
idea. What would you even do? Would you stay in your house? Would you go
They
outside
tell
in the
you
streets?
stand in a doorway because that's where you've got the most.
So a lot like a tornado.
The most
Yeah.
support is
or
right there.
hurricane.
Yeah, you got,
Okay.
where you've got the most support. You stand in a doorway.
Well, the Tohoku earthquake lasted for a full 6 minutes, and as if the shaking wasn't bad enough, the quake triggered 128-foot tsunami waves.
128 feet waves.
Waves,
That-
not just one.
Yeah,
several,
waves,
several,
multiple.
Yeah.
And they crashed into Miyako, a city in northeastern Japan. In some places, the water traveled inland as far as 6 miles.
Oh, my
That's
goodness.
a lot of water.
That is a lot of water.
As we
for-
mentioned
That's like,
above,
that's like a 12-story building almost, 128 feet.
absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, that's unbelievable.
Mm.
As we mentioned above, more than 15,000 people lost their lives. In addition, millions lost access to running water or electricity, and more than 120,000 buildings were destroyed within a matter of minutes.
Oh,
These included hospitals, schools, homes, businesses, airports, train stations, and everything else you can imagine. Perhaps most notably, the tsunami also caused a cooling system failure at Fukushima nuclear power plant, leading to the infamous meltdown.
Yeah, they had to release some radioactive material into the ocean, I think, right?
I think so. But shortly after the disaster, the traumatized survivors began seeing apparitions.
Okay, so this is where our
This-
legend
This
Here
is
comes
where
the
the
legend.
legend comes
Comes
I was
in.
wondering where we were going. Okay.
right?
The faces of people began showing up in puddles. Soaking wet individuals appeared at people's front doors. People were seen at the beach the following summer still wearing their soaked winter coats. Several taxi drivers claimed that they had picked up riders who simply vanished. And these weren't one-off sightings. Residents all across the hardest-hit cities were reporting such apparitions. The tsunami ghost stories became so pervasive that university academics started cataloging the stories.
Tsunami ghost stories. Okay.
That's right. People genuinely believed that they were seeing these visions. Richard Lloyd Perry, a British journalist who had lived in Japan for 18 years, spent several weeks in the disaster area. He wrote, quote, "Stories of ghosts and hauntings and supernatural events were reported to the extent that it almost seemed like an epidemic."
So this
Oh,
is
wow.
a lot.
That's
A lot of people are seeing these things.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenon across the nation. 5 years, or across the area, I should say. 5 years later, a graduate student named Yuka Kudo traveled to the area specifically to visit taxi drivers and get their stories. The first cabbie told Kudo of an encounter he had had in the summer of 2011. It had only been a few months since the tsunami, and there were barely any customers. He was naturally shocked to suddenly spot a young woman hailing him down in a particularly hard-hit area. Wearing a heavy winter coat in the middle of the summer, the figure was also completely drenched. The driver barely had time to realize that it hadn't rained in days before she climbed into the back seat and asked to be driven to the largely abandoned Minomihama, I believe I'm saying that right, Minomihama district. Quote, "That area is almost empty," he said while switching on the meter. "Are you sure?" There was a long silence. Then in a shivering voice, the woman asked, "Have I died?" The terrified driver turned around to face the customer, but found absolutely nothing or anyone in his car. In all, 7 different cab drivers detailed similar experiences.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I actually watched a documentary on this, and many people answered their doors to apparitions looking for a way home.
Right.
While there are no clean and clear explanations to these sightings, it may be helpful to examine Japan's historic relationship with the spirit realm. The Shinto religion has a long-standing cultural relationship with ghosts. They believe that spirits inhabit all things, both animate and inanimate.
Mm-hmm.
Many Japanese came to believe that because the tsunami took people before they were ready to die, their restless spirit still wanders the plane of reality.
Okay, so it caught so many of them off guard and early that they're still wandering around. That's what they're thinking.
Yes. Richard Perry, the British journalist mentioned earlier, collected so much data on these happenings that he wrote a book about it called Ghosts of the Tsunami. It's available on Amazon for $11.99. While many might think Japan to be one of the least religious nations in the world, Perry has discovered otherwise. Mm-hmm. Quote, "I hadn't realized how real and alive the cult of the ancestors and the cult of the dead is," Perry reported.
Wow.
And another thing that there's some similar happenings in New Orleans after Katrina came through. They had taxi drivers reporting kind of the same thing. But in Japan, the taxi drivers were instructed to just go along with it, do what the spirit says. And in New Orleans, the taxi drivers decided if they weren't getting paid, they weren't taking anybody anywhere.
Right.
No. Ghost or no ghost.
That's right. Get out of my
cab. Come up
cab.
with some real cash.
And now for something completely off topic and off kilter. Brace yourself for the oddity du jour.
I have a vivid memory from my middle school days of doing a project around my hometown of Montgomery, Texas. We, as students, were tasked with discovering the rich history of our quaint little town, or at least it was a little back then. And at one of the sites we visited, I was shocked to find that buried in the ground was a plaque that read, quote, "On April 25th, 1987, a time capsule was buried at this site."
Oh, that's right.
Oh, time capsule, yeah.
And I remember this project. I had to do it 4 times.
Yeah.
But it was, let's just stop and appreciate the project, because it was the historical, the Montgomery Historical Scavenger Hunt Project. So the school teachers, the history teachers, really embraced the town's history, which Montgomery is one of the oldest towns in Texas.
Yeah, birthplace of the Texas flag. At the time, I didn't really know what a time capsule was, and after it was explained to me, all I wanted to do was crack that puppy open and see what was inside. Felt like modern-day buried treasure. Now, we've covered a couple of time capsules in our podcast episode 1 of Season 5 titled Underground.
That was a good episode.
Right.
It was
where
a lot of fun.
we talked about Miss Belvedere, a buried Plymouth Sport coupe that unfortunately did not survive its 50-year entombment.
That's right.
Now, this story got me wondering if there were other disappointing time capsules that either did not stand the test of time or were just fated to be boring from the start. So we'll start off with a funny one. A time capsule was buried in 1947 by the Superintendent Harry Studdy of Westport Elementary School in Missouri. A note was left by Harry to tell the folks of the future that the time capsule existed and that it wasn't to be opened for 50 years. Okay. But he left out a very important detail. where the heck he buried it.
Where was it located?
So a teacher was tasked with finding any information she could about a potential location, but she didn't have much to go on as the school's original blueprints were also nowhere to be found. She regaled the whole thing as, quote, a history mystery.
Oh, that's cool.
So a time capsule in 1965 was opened, from 1965 was opened in Smithtown, Long Island, in front of a large gathering of people. What would you say was 350th anniversary?
Tri-sesquicentennial, I guess.
Yeah, so this was the town's tri-sesquatch centennial.
Sesquicentennial.
So it was a big event.
Yeah.
People were dressed like colonials and were partying from dusk till dawn. When it came time for the dramatic unveiling, though, it was a party foul. The capsule had a phone book, some paraphernalia from the 300th anniversary celebration 50 years earlier, and some pennies from the 50s and 60s.
That's it? That's not even worth it.
Kind of a lame capsule, yeah.
Yeah, so this event was concisely wrapped up by the executive director of the town's historical society, quote, the most interesting thing that came out of the time capsule was the smell. It was horrible. He said, I've smelled history before. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I've smelled history before. History does not smell like that.
Kind of musty.
Yeah, he said it was the most powerfully musty smell that I've ever smelled in my life. Interesting. So in 1995, we'll jump a little bit, a 100-year-old capsule thought to contain historical documents was opened by hopeful scholars in New Zealand. According to the New York Times, quote, all they found was muddy water and a button.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
didn't seal it up very well.
Right, just like our Miss Belvedere.
Miss Belvedere, yeah.
So for our last one, we'll go to Derry, New Hampshire, Derry, New Hampshire, where a time capsule was buried in 1969. Astronaut Alan Shepard was a Derry native, and it was believed that he had put some memorabilia inside. The town was excited to open the safe that served as the capsule, but were not only disappointed at the lack of Shepard memorabilia, but also the lack of, well, anything.
It was empty?
Yeah, the capsule was entirely empty with no evidence of decay to suggest that something may have degraded over time. It was just empty.
Somebody swiped the contents somewhere along the way.
That's the thing. Right. There's no record as to what may have been in the capsule, but it is known that the capsule was moved twice during the last few decades. And since the combination to the safe was written on the back, it very well may have had some valuable items in it that were swindled during one of those moves. But I suppose we'll never know.
Check eBay.
Check eBay. I got my info from mentalfloss.com, Historic Montgomery, Texas's Facebook page, mentalfloss.com, and historians.org.
Nice.
Very
Good job,
nice.
Sam.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, how about a story from the United States, finally? From Reddit.com and also RoadsideAmerica.com, we find the intriguing tale about a popular local attraction in Bucksport, Maine. It appears that back in the mid-1700s, the town's founder, Colonel Jonathan Buck, he named the town after his favorite person, was having an affair with a local young woman. When she became pregnant, the colonel forced her to leave town. She took up shelter in a cabin on her father's property and raised her son alone. Many years later, when the boy was a teenager, the woman approached Colonel Buck for financial assistance in raising their son. At this, the colonel claimed that the woman was a witch, and he had her burned at the stake. Well, as the townspeople were taking her body down, her son tried to retrieve it in order to bury her on his own property. He grabbed her leg and tried to wrestle the body away from the townspeople, but due to being badly decomposed from the burning, the leg came off in his hand.
Oh.
He took the leg and said it would be buried near his home, but before he left, however, he told the colonel, quote, your tomb shall bear the mark of a witch's foot for all eternity. Yeah, it seems like kind of an odd curse, and no one really paid much attention to it at the time. But after the colonel died, a tombstone was erected for him, and overnight, a leg-shaped stain appeared right on the face of it. People tried to remove the stain, but it wouldn't go away. So eventually, they just replaced the stone on the tomb entirely, only for a new identical stain to appear in the exact same spot on the new stone. The legend grew over the years, the leg legend, I guess you could call it. In the 1900s, the town of Bucksport began selling postcards of the cursed tomb. Fame of the legendary leg stain has spread to the point that the town, recognizing a good thing, has upgraded the cursed tomb experience in recent years. There is now a little parking area next to the cemetery and a wheelchair-friendly concrete ramp.
There's money to be made, folks.
Yes.
Come see the leg. And it's not a lamp.
Right. And nearby restaurants are selling chicken legs and legs of lamb.
Oh, my
I don't know. But now there are pictures of the tomb. You can see these online, and they do show the definite stain in the shape of like a stockinged leg or perhaps a boot. So is this legend true? Well, doubters point out that the British did not actually burn witches in North America, but rather they hung them. And Colonel Buck was just a justice of the peace, so he didn't have the authority to hang anyone, much less burn them. And they point out that Colonel Buck was born in 1719, some 30 years after the last known witch trial in New England. So likely the stain is just a shapely iron deposit on the monument, but it's still interesting nonetheless.
That's right. It's a legend it's a story that just someone told someone, like me. I tell my kids all kinds of stuff, and it gets passed on. And that's right.
Well, when you see the stain on the tomb, it does look like a leg,
right?
And so you can certainly make up a good legend to go with that.
Well, we had a lot of excitement here in the greater Cut and Shoot area back in April as millions of people experienced a total eclipse of the sun.
Man, that was cool. I had a lot of fun. That was a fun day.
Well, the Inuit people of Greenland have an interesting bit of lore about eclipses. And this is a family show. We will clean up the story.
It's like that, is it?
It's like that, but you'll still get the idea.
Right.
This information comes to us from listverse.com. According to the Inuit, the moon and sun were brother and sister. They grew up playing happily together until they became teenagers. That's when that's when the moon tried to get too friendly with the sun. The sun fled from the moon and took off across the sky. The moon took off after the sun and continues to chase her until this day. The moon is so determined to catch her that he forgets to eat. His ravenous desire for the sun causes him to starve himself, growing thinner and creating the various phases of the moon. That's one strange explanation.
That's already weird.
Right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That means when you look up at the sun and the moon, what you're really seeing is a victim running from an unrelenting predator. But wait, it gets worse. When there's a solar eclipse, it means that the moon has actually caught up with the sun and is doing something that you probably don't want your kids to be watching through a pinhole in a shoebox or through eclipse glasses.
Yeah. I was enjoying the eclipse up until that.
Whoa!
That's right.
We didn't need to be voyeurs.
Greenland has some interesting legends.
Such a small population that, okay. We have been doing Remnant Stew podcasts for several years now, and we love our listeners. And it's our passion to share crazy and bizarre stories with you. Our continuing goal, however, is to increase our listenership and share our stories with an even larger number of people.
That's right, but growing a podcast audience takes a lot of time and energy. That's where you can help us out. Studies have shown that overwhelmingly, word of mouth is the best promotion tool for the growth of a podcast.
That's right.
So we're asking you to please share Remnant Stew with your friends. Pick out a favorite episode and pass it along.
Right.
We would really appreciate it. And thanks so much already for the support that you've given us. We love you guys.
We really do.
Very much so.
Now, this is one of my favorite legends. Back in the early 1700s, the French were trying to colonize their settlements in North America. They established 3 main outposts along the Gulf Coast at Mobile, Biloxi, and New Orleans. The inhabitants of these cities were primarily explorers, trappers, and traders, and as such, these communities were approximately 95% male and rough.
Makes sense,
men.
yeah.
The Catholic priests became concerned that without wives for these men, the future of Christian evangelism in the French territories was at risk. So that
makes sense. Yeah. Totally.
So the priests contacted officials in the port cities back in France to send over any spare women that they might have.
We just have these hanging around. Let's just send them over there.
And they did.
They found some, yeah.
They
just
did.
Don't go past Sicily because they might have to take 6.
Yeah.
These officials happily obliged by emptying out their prisons and brothels and sent the women to the New World.
You're out of here.
But however, surprisingly, these ladies didn't make good domestic partners for the trappers and traders.
Really?
Go figure.
Bizarre.
So they asked King Louis XIV for help. The Sun King, as Louis was called, issued a call for virtuous women
Oh, there we go.
who were living in convents and orphanages to avail themselves of an opportunity to travel to New Orleans to be betrothed to men they had never met.
Okay.
This
Which
is
is
going to
that-
go well, folks.
Well,
This
that's
is gonna
not
go
really all
well.
that. It's not that unusual.
Yeah,
No, it's-
happened a lot.
In 1728, the first group of virtuous women arrived in New Orleans. They were all orphans with respectable backgrounds and had been handpicked for the journey. When they disembarked from the ship, the residents of the city noticed how pale these young women appeared to be.
Wow.
Of course, the ocean journey at that time would have taken a couple of months and was a hard journey for
Yeah.
the women. Some even died during the passage.
Right.
What was even more odd about them, though, is that their trunks, which they called cassettes, looked more like caskets or coffins.
Oh.
This led to the women being given the nickname casket girls. The women were given lodging in a building known as the Ursuline Convent, while suitable husbands could then be found for them.
Right. So you stay here till we can find you a man.
So stayed there in the convent with the nuns. But then an odd thing occurred. Soon after the casket girls arrived, the city began experiencing mysterious deaths. The nuns at the convent
That's saying a lot for New Orleans, by the way.
Right. This is very much part of the history of New
Yeah,
Orleans.
Early on, yeah.
The nuns at the convent began to suspect that the casket girls might be up to no good.
No.
After an examination of their third-floor living quarters, found that their trunks were actually empty rather than containing clothes and other personal items, the nuns determined that the casket girls were, dun dun dun, vampires.
Vampire
Of course,
girls. Yeah.
The women who had not married were promptly rounded up and shipped back to France.
Take them back.
Realizing the vampiric situation, the nuns had the shutters on the third-floor windows nailed shut using silver nails blessed by the Pope.
Wait, hold on there.
And this is a story. Like if you go to visit New Orleans and you visit the Ursuline Convent, they'll tell you this story. Now, there's a lot of
Wait, I want to
talk about
wrong.
that's
Why-
right.
weird.
Who would bring nails to the Pope?
Yeah,
Holy
please bless
Father,
these,
we
like-
need for you to bless these nails.
Silver,
And it took.
silver ones.
And how long would it have taken to?
Yeah, he's way
Because the
over
Pope
there.
is all the
ship
way
them
across.
over and ship them back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway,
or they
but
just happen to have some extra Pope
those-
nails
Right.
laying around for the
It's
occasion.
a holy water that he blessed once when he came by.
Yeah, I don't know.
They just dipped them in there. That's
be.
just mere details. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
But I
Depend-
thought silver was for werewolves, not for. You had to have wooden stakes for
I
vampires.
or
I'm
and
lost.
garlic. I don't know. Depending on the version of the story that you hear, this was done to either seal the vampires in, and that's the one I've heard, to
okay.
seal it in,
Yeah, hold
to
them
keep them, or to prevent them from returning to their caskets. And in some of them,
Keep them out of the building altogether.
that's right. And in some legends, the girls were the vampires, and in some legends, the girls were just the ones that carried the vampires over in the boxes. Like they were
yeah.
the caretakers.
Oh. They were stewards.
But the Ursuline Convent building still stands today, and yes, those shutters remain nailed shut just to keep the vampires out, or
Right.
to keep them in,
Keep them
one or
in,
the
that's
other.
Yeah, I saw a picture of it. It's a great big old building.
I've
You wonder how
actually-
it stood up this long. In New Orleans, the climate's pretty rough. But
I don't think I've been inside of it, but I've been outside of it. I've seen it, and I've heard this myth. But this myth doesn't really stand up to fact checking, like Phil's already pointed out.
I'm going through my list here, and it's a little.
Well, there
weird.
probably was some element of truth to it.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. While women were recruited to come to France to marry colonists, they didn't bring coffin-like chests. Rather, they each carried a cassette, which is a small box that would have held their supplies and valuables, not quite big enough to be a coffin or a casket. They were known as the casket girls. While the word cassette does translate to casket, it still originally meant small box, not a coffin. And it wasn't until the mid-1800s that coffins began to be called caskets.
Okay, so this predates that terminology.
Exactly.
Though. So they were casket girls because they had these little boxes, not coffins. Okay.
But New Orleans is intrinsically linked to vampires, and this is the beginning of where that began. It really is. And if you take a tour through the Ursuline Convent building today, you'll be told, as fact, that the vampire casket girls were a real menace to New Orleans in the 1700s.
I'm still curious. When they shipped them back, did the craziness stop?
Well, once they shipped
Have
them
you been
back
to
and
New
nailed...
Orleans?
Yes, that's why I've got to ask the question. The mysterious deaths. When they shipped them back, did it stop?
I don't know. I don't know. Probably...
I would check the ones that had husbands now.
Right. Did they survive? Well, I think this one may qualify as more of perhaps an urban legend, but it's too interesting to pass by. Perhaps you're familiar with the notion that upper-class Victorians in England in the 1800s were so prudish that they made extensive use of tablecloths to cover up their table's bare legs. The myth carries the idea that shapely table legs were so provocative that the dictates of polite society demanded that they be hidden from the voyeuristic public view.
It's a table leg. It's holding up your table.
Of course, the Victorian era, named for Queen Victoria, was noted as a time when in vogue fashion for women was floor-length dresses with long-sleeved petticoats, and even gloves were commonly worn by women during this era in an effort to show as little skin as possible. For women to show bare legs or even stockinged calves was considered shameful. So it's not a huge leap to consider that these same Victorians would want to cover their shapely table legs also, except that it's not true.
And I've never, I think in Victorian times you had the prudish
Right.
society, but I also think they were very provocative too.
Yes.
There was
There's
the other side.
of it?
The other side.
You mean Victoria's Secret?
That's Victoria's.
By the way, Victoria, if you're looking for... Well, never mind.
Hang on.
Well, according to Metafloss.com, this myth actually did begin in the 1800s, and it was begun by an Englishman, but he was in America at the time. In 1839, a British naval officer named Frederick Marriott was traveling through the United States and was taking careful notes on what he observed. Upon returning to England, he published his book titled A Diary in America, in which he summarized his experiences. Well, while visiting Niagara Falls, he observed a young woman fall and scrape her knee. A while later, he saw her again and he asked her if her leg was okay. Well, the young woman was aghast at his inappropriate language, and she stated, quote, "A gentleman only refers to limbs in the presence of a lady and never legs, even when talking about furniture."
She was scandalized.
Marriott goes on to explore this ridiculous concept by saying that he later visited a seminary in the United States where he saw a piano with legs covered by, quote, "modest little trousers with frills at the bottom of them." The captain says that the coverings were there to maintain the utmost purity of the young ladies. So it appears that Marriott included these anecdotes as opportunities for amusement. However, the public took this joke and ran with it until the urban legend was born. So it was not in Victorian England. It was in the United States where this actually occurred.
Translation.
I think a lot of legends start this way. I've tried to start things with my kids, we live on the lake, and I tried to tell them that there's a lake monster, kind of like Loch Ness monster.
Yeah.
But we have Lake Conroe
the
monster.
Lake Conroe.
And its name is Connor.
The Lake Cut and Shoot.
Yeah.
Connor.
Well, we hope that you've enjoyed these non-British legends, though I bet you thought we slipped up on that last one. But join us for the next time for part 2, when we will be fully focused on stories from Great Britain.
And there's a lot of them.
Phil here, reminding you to check out Facebook and Instagram pages at Remnant Stew Podcast. Drop us an email at staycurious@remnantstew.com just to say hi or to let us know about any topics you would like to hear us cover in an upcoming episode.
Remnant Stew is a part of Rook and Raven Ventures and is created by me, Leah Lamp. Steve Meeker researches and writes each episode that we then host together. Our audio producer is Philip Sinkfeld. The Oddity du Jour is brought to you by Sam Lamp. Theme music is by Kevin MacLeod with voiceover by Morgan Hughes. Special thanks goes out to Judy Meeker. For a complete list of sources for this episode, please see the episode's transcript, and there is a link to it in the show notes.
Well, now, before you go, please hit the follow button so you won't miss an episode. Head on over to Apple Music and leave us a review. Share Remnant Stew with your friends, your family, Van Hunks, the Manamoggle, and of course, Kraken if you run into him. Until next time, choose to be kind and always stay curious. He took the leg and said he would let me start that part.